conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome, everybody, to another amazing day right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. For those of you watching on video format, you can see I'm not alone. I am joined by Nick Nash sitting off to my left and Chris Wiest there on the virtual monitor joining us remotely. I know I haven't done a video episode in quite some time, but I thought it'd be a great opportunity because I have some much better looking people on than myself. And on top of that, I did have a big announcement to make. There will be more video episodes every Monday, pretty much guaranteed, because with Kentucky's voice and has brought me in and put me on WBNA 21 every Monday at 11 p.m. in Louisville. So every Monday, 11 p.m., if you live in Louisville, tune in to channel 21 and you'll be able to see the Andrew Cooperrider Show. And that starts June 3rd. So certainly excited to announce that. And we will have more places where the Andrew Cooperrider Show is going, and I'll be excited to announce that when it comes. But today, we did have a very special episode. So for those of you who watch sports and have seen Around the Horn or something like that, we're going to discuss a few key races that we zeroed in on that I think would be really good to hear about today. And this is going to be a two-parter. We're actually going to have a show today and then a show tomorrow going over this exact thing. And those races we'll be covering today is House District 2, Senate District 1, and House District 50. And then tomorrow we'll be covering House District 64, Senate District 7, House District 45, and we'll be making our picks as a group. At the end of our discussion, we'll be trying to figure out what percentages it lands at, and then the winner will get a fabulous trophy. I'm not lying. I do have a fabulous little tiny trophy that we can hand out. Maybe the loser has to buy dinner for the others. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Total percentage, though, off, right? So we'll add up how far you're off total across all 6 races. But before I dig into it, I think I should probably introduce my guests, allow them to talk and make a case as to what expertise they're bringing to the table today. First, let's start off with Nick Nash. Nick, why don't you introduce yourself? Talk about your background.
Hello. Great to be here, Andrew. Thanks so much for the invitation. Having lived in Kentucky, worked across campaigns, Mike Harmon's campaign manager in 2019, then went work for the state party. Recently, 2023, was Ryan Quarles' political director. So know Kentucky well, all 120 counties, visited many times. And through that time, just built up a network across the state. And so I'm glad you invited me on. Glad to give my perspective.
Fantastic. And Chris Wiest, why don't you tell us about yourself and your background?
Yeah, I'm a primarily constitutional lawyer in Northern Kentucky. Obviously, I'm involved with what some folks have described as the liberty movement, liberty candidates. My law practice includes and touches on, frankly, political law this cycle. I've had some clients that have asked me to review some things, and for some of the PAC, I've done some work for some of the PACs that are playing in some of these races. I'm very familiar with them, and happy to talk about some of these races.
And I think I brought on who I brought on because I think had totally different perspectives, quite honestly. Because you have me, who obviously I ran as a candidate, but statewide I've been a little more active. I've actually knocked in a few of these races. I've done some work in some of these races too, as well, from a political standpoint. But at the same time, Chris is involved, but he's probably the least publicly known, most influential Politico right now in the state when it comes to crafting laws. That's just my opinion. Chris, you don't have to admit it, but because of the fact that if you pass an unconstitutional law, Chris will be the one suing you. If Chris messages some people saying, hey, that law is unconstitutional, and I'm going to sue you over it if it passes, they'll go ahead and, make a difference there. So, yeah, and then we have Nick Nash I brought on because he offers a perspective that comes a little bit more from the politics as a career. is what I'll call it. Maybe
I don't work in politics now, but I have definitely been involved for a while. Happily taking a little break. And I think a lot of the races that we're going to cover, I know the incumbents and the challengers. I can speak on behalf of campaigns and listen, just having worked statewide, I understand what it means to build a diverse coalition.
Well, and two, let's just call spade. Your daily conversations, the people you're daily texting about politics is probably not the same as me and Chris.
I would agree with that.
I mean, and largely me and Chris probably talk to a lot of the same people, though. Chris, you do bring an interesting perspective as you're looking at the races we're going to be taking a look at here over the next 2 days. What are the X factors? What are the things you like to zero in on?
This is it's interesting, right? I mean, 2020 was COVID. 2022, I kind of view that election cycle as kind of the aftermath of COVID. And now we're sort of settling in a more of a, I think there's been a view in Frankfurt within the GOP, state party, et cetera, that the 2022 was more of an insurgent year. I mean, I like to liken it to, I think the more establishment folks think that this year is more of the, as I like to call it, the Empire Strikes Back. My tribe likes to think of this year as Return of the Jedi. We'll see how that turns out Tuesday. So
absolutely. Okay. And Nick, what are the X factors? What are the things you look at when you're evaluating these races?
And I know we're going to talk about this later, but I think the X factors are going to be the effectiveness of outside groups, both from both sides of this political spectrum, because we're talking about Republican primaries. We're all one big group, but we clearly have outside groups that are coming from different angles. I think the effectiveness and the money, the massive amount of money that's been spent. And in some of our rural races, I'm going to tell you from experience, weather matters. And if it's a gorgeous day with a bunch of farmers out working, that's going to affect low turnout across the state.
Well, and I think too, as well, a big X factor that's going to go into all of turnout is the fact that the presidential primary is already decided.
Yep.
And so, you would think in a presidential election primary year, that would be a big driving factor for people getting out to the polls. But where that has been already decided on the Republican side, I think we are going to see some historically low turnout personally for a presidential election year primary, certainly. Now, before we go into our first race in this next segment, I want to iterate to both you guys and, of course, everybody listening. As we discuss these races, I want to have honest and straightforward discussions. That means when we're making our picks too as well, it is not us saying who we want to win. Okay, we're going to do the best we can to talk about the factors here without allowing our personal biases to affect it. I'm trying to make sure I'm breaking outside of my bubble. Sometimes I can be in a echo chamber with people. And of course, online, Twitter, Facebook, that isn't the same as what's going on the ground. That's one thing I have to be cognizant of. And, but for those of you listening and who are very online, as you hear us making these picks and discussing it, I cannot reiterate this enough. This is not us necessarily saying who we want to win. Just because somebody says that they think this person will win doesn't mean that's the person they actually support. And I'll probably have to repeat that a few times, and I'm sure you guys could understand why some people may take some of what we say personal, but they shouldn't. We're trying to look at this from a strictly, actuarial side of things, just trying to talk about the races as we see them and what's going through our heads. But before we dig into what will be our first race, which is, House District 2, Richard Heath, incumbent, being challenged by Kimberly Holloway. Before we dig into that, I do have to take a short break here. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. If you want to reach out to the show, feel free to email info@theandrewshow.com. You can also go ahead and head over to theandrewshow.com and hit that contact tab. If you want to check out old shows, hit the listen now tab, and you can find all those everywhere. We do a video episode only once a week here starting in June for sure, but only once a week. But if you want to hear the audio version, which is also amazing, though I don't often have guests on, well, you can head on over to the Andrew Show and hit the listen now tab. But we'll be back in a few short minutes. And you are back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. I'm joined by some fellow political experts, politicos, whatever you call us. Chris Wiest, coming from Northern Kentucky, constitutional attorney, and Nick Nash here, and you're from more central Kentucky.
Woodford County. Yes,
Woodford County has a little bit different of a political experience than either two of us have. So I do think we'll have some interesting perspectives. The first race I want to look at, and each of us will get about 2 to 3 minutes or so to discuss what we're seeing on the race, is House District 2, Richard Heath versus Kimberly Holloway. To give you some top-line stats here, Richard Heath has personally raised, as to date, about $30,000, and we've seen independent expenditures of about $40,000 coming from the Conservative Commonwealth Coalition PAC or something like that, which is, of course, the more left-leaning teachers union funded PAC. And then Kimberly Holloway has personally raised $18,795. Independent expenditures, I put a question mark. There hasn't been any booked as of recent reports, but I know for a fact there has recently been some independent expenditure spent on her behalf in that race. I do not know how much. So to kind of go through, and so both of you kind of see how we're going to flow through this, and so the audience can kind of see. When I'm looking at that race, I'm seeing a few different things here. And the biggest X factor for me is the fact that Kimberly Holloway ran as a write-in candidate 2 years ago. Early on, I said that this race, a lot of people thought this race was going to be really easy for Richard Heath to walk away with. I called it early, saying this would not be an easy race at all, because Holloway, running as a write-in candidate in 2022, was able to generate 2,300 write-in voters. Now, granted, not every single one of those are going to be registered Republicans. Not every single one of these are going to be necessarily people who show up to vote in the primaries. But if you're willing to show up and write in, and that shows organization too. 2,300 write-in votes is nothing to sneeze at in a House district race. And that shows a level of organization that can only carry forward into this race. And here's the other thing. The last time this district had a primary was 2012, and less than 1,000 people showed up to vote. And so while it has been redrawn since then, that less than 1,000 people showing up, coupled with it being what I think will be a low turnout year, even if she's only has 1,000 or so write-in votes coming into this that now will show up and vote in the primary, I do think that ends up giving her a leg up. And reports from the ground are that Richard Heath is hit panic mode here. He's spamming a lot of texts. He sent like 3 texts, I guess, in one day. Which is a sign that they were not expecting this to be as difficult of a race. They don't have time to get mail out, I think, which is why they're doing that text messaging. They've run out of time there. And then on top of that, he's out door knocking, but funny enough, he's hitting only the doors that have Kimberly Holloway signs, is the reports from the ground. And the reason why is because the reports I'm getting is that he's knocking doors of people that have never voted in Republican primaries before. They plan to now for Kimberly, but they've never voted in these races before, and he's showing up and knocking their doors. You and I both know, Nick, and you know, Chris, in no regular world, if you're setting out with an actual campaign strategy that's not last minute, you would be never hitting doors that have never voted in a Republican primary before. That isn't going to happen. You're in panic mode, I think. Nick, what do you think?
Well, just talking about House District 2, plain and simple, we have to understand that is all of Graves County, and that is South McCracken. That is rural. It is farmers. It is Mayfield. It is a lot of where the horrible tornadoes that went through Kentucky, that was the epicenter. But I think you're 100% right. I think this caught people off guard. I think the second district was not on a lot of people's radars, and a long time, I think this was a sleeper race, and it came through, and now you're seeing scrambling. But I will take the counterpoint here. Richard is chairman of the Graves County Republican Party. He is also chairman of the House Agricultural Committee, which is, for that district, a very important position. And I think now that Richard is out communicating, he's got his campaign in some sort of movement, I think what you're going to see is that Richard will pull it out, but I think it will be much closer than expected. Knowing both of these families, both the Heaths and his opponent, they're both very reputable. They have
Mm-hmm.
they're not some outsiders, obscure people that aren't known. They're very well known in.
I
the
mean, I've
Graves
known him
County
for
area.
years. Last year for
Yeah.
Fancy Farm, I stayed at the Holloway's house.
See,
I mean,
there you
I've
are.
known him for years. Chris, what are you thinking?
I mean, Kim has been out. I call it the stealth campaign. Kim and her family have been out knocking doors, working since March. And Richard, I think, we're going to talk about a couple other races later today. I think he took this for granted for a while. And I think she has snuck up on him. She's done a lot of work. He's in catch-up mode. I think if the election were to be held today, it would be different than maybe Tuesday. I mean, he's I think he's in catch-up mode. Kim's been throwing shade on him for years. I mean, I think he sued her off the ballot, if I remember right, a couple of years ago.
In 2022, he sued her off the ballot there. Yeah.
And some folks thought that was dirty. That's sort of still festering down there. I think Nick is right that Richard, is on some committees in the House that are helpful to the district, and Richard has the ties to the Graves party apparatus, and the votes are mostly. I mean, that district's votes, a lot more is in Graves than South McCracken. So it's an interesting race. You want a prediction from me? I think it's a 52-48 race. I think Heath catches up. But that's one it may surprise us. It may go the other way because he took it for granted for so long.
So Chris, you're 52-48, Richard Heath. Nick?
Well, and might I just point in here too, as we know, Richard Heath just ran for agriculture commissioner last cycle in 23, and he ran for agriculture commissioner in 2015. I think that will also play into Graves County. I think that's why Kim has seen some kind of movement here, is because, when you got a state house member that just wants to be a state house member and stay in the seat and work hard and be that chair, but Richard's shown that he wanted to make other moves. But I think Richard and his base in Graves County, barring any, if there's a storm and turnout's high, that could change. I think it's going to be 55-45 Richard.
Yeah, I mean, so it's hard, right? So I called this kind of early on. That independent expenditure comes in and books that $40,000, but I feel like they really didn't put it to good action until the end. Now, we have seen in that late resurgence some pretty good attack lines coming out of Richard Heath, going after Kimberly Holloway for being a priorly registered libertarian and tying that to the more pro-abortion stance that the National Libertarian Party has. And speaking as somebody who, full disclosure, I was in the Libertarian Party for a few months too as well. The state platform is not as clear on what their view is on abortion as the national. And one of the biggest reasons why I was not in there for long was the view on abortion on my side of things. So I can understand that. And honestly, too, I've always said, I ran for office and I was always so surprised nobody used that attack line. I said, if I was running against a former libertarian, I would use that attack line all day long. Because, of course, I'm familiar with what the platforms are, and I know where that weak spot is. But if I'm trying to book it, it's those write-in votes, those 2,300 write-in votes, and then the low turnout. I mean, if we think there's only going to be, on the high side, 2,000 people that turn out to vote, and she can, as she has been working it, and she's shown that organization, get those 1,200, 1,300 people out to vote that wrote her in or even looked at it, I think it does end up falling in her direction because it really doesn't matter what you do. I know Heath is revving it up, and I know, of course, we've seen that kind of action going on. But at the same time, those are people. It's kind of like it's a Trump kind of thing. It doesn't matter what you do. Those people, I believe, are going to stay with Kim. I think it ends up being 57-43 for Kim. I think Kim gets close to 60%. I just do. I mean, she's been out there working those doors awful hard. So we got 2 for Heath. What was your percentage?
55.
55 for Heath. And you had 52 for Heath, Chris?
I did. And, I thought about the write-ins, Andrew. I did. And I think the issue there is that the party insiders, the folks that are part of that Graves County GOP.
How big is the Graves County GOP, though?
Yeah, but they're the ones
you go out to Garrett County.
Have you been to the Graves County GOP breakfast before Fancy Farm?
I have.
That is huge.
The
Graves
but
County
that's because
GOP,
a lot of people are in town, though.
But I'm just saying that apparatus. I don't know if they meet regularly, but I've been to their meetings. It's a bigger party than you would think it is.
All I'm saying is so reflecting back on one of my old races, state senate. Garrett County has a quote unquote Republican Party, but not really.
Yeah.
I mean, they meet
quarterly,
if and barely meet at that. But they have this giant fish fry barbecue every year. And literally the chair of the Garrett County Party was out knocking doors for Donald Douglas in that state senate race. I still won Garrett County. Now, not by a lot, but I still won Garrett County. And so that's where I understand we're talking about the apparatus, but at the same time, if they're not a very active group and actually working and communicating with the grassroots, over time, I have just seen, and honestly, for my treasurer's race, where my viewpoint of the county parties has largely diminished. I don't think they're as important as a lot of people would say they were. I mean, you working on the Quarles campaign, how many county party events did Cameron show up to versus Quarles?
You're not wrong.
And Cameron, generally speaking, won across the board. Now, of course,
Trump had that endorsement in a Republican primary, I think, shifts a lot of things.
Right. And so it comes down to message. So I think that's why I'm leaning towards Kimberly. Well, coming up after this, coming up on a break, of course, we'll be discussing the Senate District 1 race, Jason Howe versus Lynn Beckler. Lynn Beckler taking him on as a challenger. Pretty interesting story there. But we'll be back in a few short minutes. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm joined by Nick Nash and Chris Wiest. We are going through some races, talking about them, making some picks. Next up on our list was Senate District 1, Jason Howe versus Lynn Beckler. Who wants to give a little bit of background on this and kind of talk about some X factors here? Who wants to go first?
I mean, I'm happy to on this. Jason Howe's the incumbent. Lynn Beckler held a state house seat down there until there was some redistricting that went on.
Oh, hold on 1 second. Let me do the top line stats. Sorry.
Yep.
Jason Howe, $164K raised. Independent expenditures to $23,000. Lynn Beckler has $32,759 raised. No independent expenditures booked for him as of 2 weeks ago. Go ahead, Chris. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so, Jason's the incumbent. Beckler's got some name ID down there because he's, some of that district overlapped his former state house district. Obviously, he kind of got shoved out with the 2022 or 2021 redistricting. Lynn is definitely more of the conservative Republican. Jason Howe is probably more of a centrist. The state Senate campaign caucus committee has played pretty heavily in that, which has got some
right, and we don't know how much they spend on that. That's not available to us right now.
No, but it will be. And my understanding is there's been at least, I think, 2 mailers that they've run. So, you got to figure state Senate, that's got to be, 10, 15 grand probably. I mean, if I had to just ballpark that. So they played. I know CCCP has played. That's Trey Watson's group with the teachers union. It's kind of a unholy alliance of the teachers union in Louisville and the chamber folks, kind of all combined in this unholy alliance. So they're backing Howe. Obviously, Howe's got the fundraising advantage. Lynn's a guy, though, that worked the race. He always has. He'll go out and knock doors. Lynn pulled in the right to life endorsement. Obviously, Howe did not. But I think, at the end of the day, Howe's got the incumbency advantage. Howe's got the fundraising advantage. I think Howe comes out on top. I'll give you numbers after everybody else goes.
So for me, looking at this race and this specific district, there's a big incumbency advantage, and that's Fancy Farm. They get to speak at Fancy Farm every single year, and that is a very important thing, of course, for that district. So I think that goes – I don't think that could be understated, the incumbency effect that comes with this specific Senate district. Now, on the other side of things, the X factor here is you've got the Murray State college Republicans, and they're a pretty active organization. And personally know the chair there pretty well. He worked in my treasurer's campaign, and we text all the time. And I know that they have been out working for Lynn, very excited. They're very excited when they saw that to work for Lynn. I mean, I got a text that was like, let's go. We'll get this organized. And my experience when working with him, but not only that, but when Bill was working on my campaign, he's from Christian County. Well, you go look at the map, and I won Christian County for treasurer. So that tells me as well there is some knowledge about how to work a campaign there. Obviously, Lynn Beckler isn't the incumbent, but he does have the effect of having, of course, ran for office in that area and having won before. However, at the same time, a Senate district is much bigger than a House district. And I talk about it on the show often where I think there's a point of diminishing rate of return where in a Senate race or a House race, once you hit a certain amount of money, if you spend more than that, it don't get me wrong, it could affect the outcome if you've just got a killer message, but really it doesn't. And I think that's much higher in a Senate race than it is a House race. I think around a House race, I normally say it's around 50, 60K or so, where you start to get a diminishing rate of return for amount spent. But in a Senate race, I think it's much higher, around about $200,000. And Lynn Beckler not having come close to that does make me look at that race with a little bit of an eye towards Jason Howell. Nick, what do you think?
I'll give it to you. I think Lynn is working, and I think his core base of support is where he's from in Crittenden County. But the district is Fulton, Hickman, Graves, Callaway, Trigg, Lyon, and Crittenden. So, even if Lynn is able to win Crittenden County,
he'll win Trigg too.
Oh, maybe. I think Jason's running away with this.
I think he's running away with it.
No, and it's not necessarily about the fundraising advantage. That Howell name in the Purchase region is very well known. You're talking about another chairman of Senate Agriculture. You're talking about somebody who championed the tornado relief bills that affected that entire district. You're talking about he runs an independent law firm. He was on a school board before he was in the state Senate. He's been involved. This man has raised his family in Callaway County and Murray. The apparatus behind Jason is that he represents the first district well. I have a lot of contacts down in that area, and I just think Jason is hitting it out of the park. I'll go ahead. I'll make the first prediction. I think it's going to be 75-25, maybe even 80-20. Jason.
I think it'll be Jason as well. I think Jason will get just above 60. I think Jason will get right around about 62%. I don't think he'll go into the 70s. I just think Lynn has too much of the district locked down, but it is a big district. It's very rural areas. The grassroots efforts are great, but it's very hard to get out there door to door. It's very hard to talk to the voter. If you can't reach into their home with mailers, you can't reach in their home with ads. I mean, what is it? Is that the Paducah media market, or is that out of Tennessee?
It's actually, so it's two different media markets. You would have actually maybe three. Actually, you would have Paducah, you would have the Evansville because of Crittenden County, and then you'd have Nashville because of Trigg County.
Yeah, and so that three different media markets. It's certainly difficult. Now, that being stated, out of those districts listed, out of those counties, I won a few of them with grassroots work out there, beating out a lot of money that somebody had spent against me in that area in some of those counties. But I think he'll be in the lower 60s. Like I said, I think I give him 62. I don't think he gets as high as 70. Chris, what are you thinking?
I'm with you, Andrew. I think Lynn's got that conservative base. I think, I'm not discounting. I think Nick's made some great points about, the region and the area. I'm 61-39. How?
61-39. I'm 62-38. And you're 72.
I'll say 75-25.
75-25. Okay, 75-25. And once again, I'll reiterate this. We are making predictions on percentages. We are not trying. We're not saying that's who we want to win. None of these are endorsements. So those of you candidates, because if I know how Twitter and Facebook and everything works and how this show works, every single candidate we're talking about will be watching this. So do not run with this and say, I was endorsed by this person. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying we even want you to win. What we're saying is
I would necessarily go that. I mean,
I'm just saying I don't necessarily want you to win just because I say you will. We're just trying to be very specific about talking about these races, but we are coming up on a break. You're talking to the Andrew Cooperrider show right now, or listening to, not talking to. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider show. If you want to reach out, if you've got your own thoughts on this, if you're watching this on social media, obviously you can comment below, share this with your quote tweets of what your thoughts are on what we're discussing, making your own predictions. Make sure you share this out. Make sure you subscribe and like and all those things. And then obviously if you're listening on WZXI, if you want to catch us early at 1:00, it goes out on, Twitter, if it's a video episode, Facebook, YouTube, always goes out on YouTube. It's just whether or not it's video or just a cover art picture or any of the podcasting platforms. It's going out at 1:00 Monday through Friday, but on WZXI, that's 94.1 FM, 95.5 FM, and 1280 AM in the central Kentucky area. You can listen to it at 9 a.m. And then there's a replay if you miss it at 9 p.m. So twice a day you can hear my wonderful voice. And then once again, WBNA TV station there in Louisville. You can start catching the show every Monday at 11 o'clock right after Steve Bannon. Right after Steve Bannon. There we go. So anyways, we'll be back in a few short minutes. We've been talking about races around the state. I've got Nick Nash with me and Chris Wiest. We're making some picks, making some predictions. Now we're going to turn to House District 50, where we've got Andy Stone taking on incumbent Candy Massaroni. Candy Massaroni has raised $34,365, and $42,000 has come in independent expenditures, and Make Liberty Win is knocking in that district, according to their independent expenditure disclosures. And then on top of that, and then we have Andy Stone. He's raised $48,000 personally with independent expenditures of $161,000. Nick, I don't think you've gotten to start one off. Nick, why don't you start us off here?
Candy Massaroni came in kind of what I would call a fluke election. She won her primary by 80 votes, was it? And that's because former House Whip Chad McCoy was running for re-election. Then he decided late that he wasn't going to run for re-election, and it was so late that they left his name on the ballot. Chad sucked up a couple hundred votes. So what I've continued to talk about, I'm going to say here, I think the power of incumbency does matter to a certain point. I think Candy, this is a different race for her. I know a lot of money has been spent on Mr. Stone's behalf, but since 2022, Nelson County has changed so much because of so many different things. The booming bourbon industry, tourism, the list goes on and on. Nelson County used to be a blue county, but in 2022, the red wave came and that entire courthouse flipped. Nelson County is under a renaissance of people switching over party registration. They're growing rapidly. That party actually has some decent apparatus. I think Candy, with her outside groups that are door knocking on her, I think she might be vulnerable, but I think that she's got enough juice going for her. There are enough new voters in Nelson County that have come into this Republican fold that she's gonna come out on top.
Chris, what are you thinking on this race?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I know Commonwealth for Conservative Action is playing on the one side, CCCP with Trey Watson, the Teachers Union is playing on the other side of this. Andy Stone is being painted as, more liberal. Candy's more moderate. Internally, I was hearing, there was concern for Candy within the Liberty kind of faction. But I think, she's been out working, hitting him, grassroots hitting him. I mean, I think she wins 53-47.
I felt differently about this race, and then I went and knocked in this race last Saturday. I actually got to hit some doors down there, experience that. Candy won last time with less than $10,000, and And largely that was due to a well-run grassroots door-knocking style campaign. That district is very knockable too as well. That plays into that factor. Then on the side of Andy Stone, I mean, there's several problems we have here. One, the Nelson County Fiscal Court and those groups that are Republican do not like the establishment due to the barrel tax move. That was actually put in place by and largely pushed by, according to my sources, Chad McCoy on his way out did a lot of things to try to get that passed, and he was the majority whip. And so they're pretty upset about how that's really messed over the ability they have to go ahead and fund their schools because they made these property tax deals. That's creating angst. But then on top of that, Andy Stone, he's coming from the school board. There is a high school merger a lot of people have a problem with there. In that area with Andy Stone coming from the school board there. I think that plays a factor. And then on top of that, Andy Stone is just not very good at lying about who he is. I mean, he was in candidate forums asked about gas tax. The easy answer here is just, no, I don't think we should raise it and leave it at that. But no, he went on to say, no, I think we do need to raise the gas tax at some point. I mean, he's running ads where he's talking about how we need to fund social emotional learning in K through 12 education more, not less. And that is, I think, a hot button issue for voters too as well. Now, that being stated, as I was out there hitting doors, Andy is running a pretty good campaign. I mean, out of the doors, I was hitting people on the list. I saw 2 or 3 that had Andy Stone signs in his yard. Now, granted, I saw 6 or 7. Then after I got done, 10 more. in that map area that had yard signs in it, but still, that's an interesting factor. I think Candy Massaroni will win. I think I don't think it'll be particularly close. I think there was some concern early on because they dumped so much money, but I think a lot of that is weathered the storm. Plus, too, as well, I'm not too familiar with the size of the people that are working over at the Commonwealth Coalition conservative the one that's working with the teachers unions and everything else, but they have found themselves now, and we'll talk about this next episode tomorrow, but they have found themselves getting involved and worrying about a lot more races than I think they thought they would need to. And so the question becomes, do they look at that and say, look, we're not doing as well as we thought here. We're not going to turn as much focus here, or you're getting our B team because we're worried about now holding on to people that we never thought we'd have to worry about. And so with that being stated, I think I'd give it to Candy. I think it's going to be more around 58-42.
I'll go Candy 53-47 with Chris.
You're going to be a little bit closer to Chris there.
Interesting. And I do want to mention this as we talk about fundraising numbers, because I think it matters with this outside money. For lack of a better term, the actual conservative groups that are spending money, in this case, Commonwealth for Conservative Action, the CEO PAC on the school choice side, they're more efficient. And so they're getting, 95 cents to $1 direct into digital, direct in the mail. CCCP is spending money, and my sense is that it's not being spent efficiently or wisely. And I think and therefore they've got to spend even more, and they are. I mean, they're putting up more dollars. Or you got the chamber money, you got the Louisville teachers money, but I think
they also get different rates when it comes to TV too than a candidate would. And so the TV,
C4CA though, I think I think there's just more bang for your buck, and so I don't think you can do a 1-to-1 comparison on the dark money or the outside PAC money necessarily, because I don't think it's being spent efficiently on both sides.
If you're being more efficient, but also you have a more in tune grassroots group when you're spending your money, like when a candidate's spending their money, they're more in tune with it. They don't need to go out and poll and figure out what do we message on and things like, not to backtrack, but going back to the Richard Heath, Kim Holloway race, Richard Heath is running ads on rounding up illegal immigrants right now because we just know that illegal immigration as a concern polls high. But when you're dealing with more local dollars and a candidate's dollars, they may be more aware of messaging that really resonates with that area. When you have people doing things for a cause, not for a paycheck, you're going to get better rates and you're going to get volunteers that are willing to do things.
Well, and money for the sake of money is not just going to win the race. You have to localize it. You have to have some sort of flair. That's why I think there has been success with the Liberty movement in Northern Kentucky. I think Candy has a grasp in Nelson County. I still think it's going to be close. Let's also say this is her first re-election. First time is always the toughest. Chris, you're saying that the more conservative PACs, are they more conservative or are they more libertarian PACs? There are libertarians that are running in Republican primaries, and where they're making issues of the liberty of your liberty movement. I think you would say that you're a part of the liberty movement that is making this money battle go back and forth.
Yeah, just real quick. I mean, I know, one of the hot button issues in that race is some of the school board issues down there in Nelson County. And I know he got popped by C4CA because he said at a candidate forum there weren't pornographic books in the school. And they pulled the library listing and they caught him, basically, not being honest about that. It's not a libertarian issue, right? I mean, parents not wanting pornography in schools is not a libertarian issue. It's a conservative issue, right? I mean, we can put whatever label on we want, but, are we generally more distrustful of government kind of in the liberty movement? We are. We think people are better, making their own decisions. Are we for anarchy like the Libertarian Party? No. So I kind of, I don't necessarily like that label. I'm familiar with the Libertarian Party, and I don't think any of these people are. But these people we're talking about are 100% pro-life for the most part, at least on the liberty side, the liberty candidates, and that's not, as Andrew mentioned before, the libertarian position. So it is what it is. But I mean, it is interesting, and I do agree with you though, Nick. This is a fight for the heart and soul of the Republican Party going forward.
Well, we'll have to continue this discussion tomorrow. We'll be talking about House District 64, Senate District 7, and House District 45. Thank you all so much for joining me. Nick and Chris will be with me again tomorrow. Until then, we'll be seeing you.